Before the world called her fearless, Nellie Bly was a restless young woman staring at a country that preferred women stay silent. She was born Elizabeth Jane Cochran in 1864 into a nation still bleeding from war and clinging tightly to old rules. Her father died when she was young, and with him vanished the comfort and security that might have softened her future. Poverty arrived not as a dramatic collapse, but as a slow tightening around the family, reducing choices and shrinking possibility. Even as a girl, she noticed how quickly society explained away women's intelligence as decoration rather than force or potential. That insult might have buried someone else, but in her it sparked a dangerous refusal to accept the script. One newspaper column mocking women pushed her beyond anger and into action, and she wrote a response under pressure. Her words were so sharp, so confident, and so impossible to dismiss that the editor publicly asked her to identify herself. That single letter changed everything, because it gave her a door into a profession designed almost entirely to exclude her. She took the name Nellie Bly, and with it came a second life built from nerve, speed, and unusual moral clarity. But newspapers did not welcome women as investigators or truth-tellers. They preferred them soft, ornamental, and safely confined to society pages. So even as her talent became obvious, she was pushed toward stories considered appropriate, harmless, and comfortably beneath her actual ability. She could have stayed there, collecting polite assignments and fading into a respectable career that history would never bother remembering. Instead, she chose danger, because danger offered something more honest than comfort ever could: the chance to uncover what powerful people hid. That choice would soon send her into one of the darkest institutions in America, not as a reporter, but as bait. In 1887, she accepted an assignment that sounded almost impossible: get herself committed to a women's insane asylum and report from inside. To do it, she rehearsed madness with terrifying precision, learning how to make men in authority believe she had lost her mind. It did not take much performance, because the system was already eager to call inconvenient women unstable, irrational, or dangerous. Once doctors and judges decided she belonged there, her freedom disappeared with shocking speed and almost no serious resistance. Blackwell's Island was not a place for healing. It was a place where the vulnerable were neglected, humiliated, and forgotten. Inside those walls, Nellie found women shivering in cold rooms, fed rotten food, and treated as if suffering itself were proof of guilt. Nurses struck patients, attendants mocked them, and the institution functioned less like care than a machine for breaking human dignity. Worst of all, she discovered that many women there were not insane at all, only poor, foreign, exhausted, or unwanted. She realized with horror that once a woman entered that place, truth itself no longer mattered enough to rescue her. Every day she stayed inside increased the risk that someone would forget the plan and leave her trapped for good. Yet she kept watching, listening, and memorizing details, because she knew outrage without evidence could still be safely ignored. When her newspaper finally arranged her release, she emerged carrying not relief alone, but a weapon sharpened into testimony. Her published exposé, later known as 10 Days in a Madhouse, exploded across the public like a lit match in dry timber. Readers were horrified, officials were embarrassed, and institutions that had depended on secrecy suddenly found themselves exposed to daylight. The investigation led to real reforms, increased funding, and a rare moment when journalism did more than merely describe suffering. Nellie Bly had not simply written a story. She had forced America to look directly at cruelty it preferred to ignore. That should have secured her place forever, but history has a habit of praising women loudly in one era, then misplacing them. Even after her breakthrough, she was treated as a novelty as much as a professional, admired without being fully respected. She moved quickly through assignments, proving again and again that she could outwork, outthink, and outlast men around her. Then came the challenge that would make her internationally famous and quietly distort how many people remembered her. Inspired by fiction, she proposed a real race around the world, not as fantasy, but as proof of her ability and speed. In 1889, she departed with a small bag and enormous expectations, turning travel into theater and discipline into spectacle. The public followed her progress obsessively, waiting for updates as she crossed oceans, railways, and borders at astonishing pace. She was no longer just a reporter. She had become a national fascination, the kind that fame often simplifies beyond recognition. When she returned after 72 days, she was celebrated as a marvel, efficient and daring enough to outrun imagination itself. But fame can be a trap, especially for women whose deeper work is easier to replace with a more marketable legend. America began remembering the adventure more easily than the brutality she had exposed, and spectacle slowly crowded out substance. This was the turning point in her story, the moment when success itself began helping erase the sharpest part of her legacy. She had shown that journalism could confront power directly, yet much of the public preferred to remember the race, not the reckoning. In time, she married industrialist Robert Seaman and entered a different world, one lined with wealth, expectation, and new constraints. After his death, she found herself managing business affairs in a male world that was just as suspicious of capable women. She tried to lead, innovate, and survive in that space, but financial troubles and legal complications steadily wore down her momentum. The woman who had once entered an asylum to reveal hidden suffering now faced quieter forms of erosion and public forgetting. She later returned to journalism, covering events with the same sharp instinct that had once made editors and institutions nervous. Even in war reporting, she showed a willingness to step where fear, chaos, and official narratives usually frightened others into silence. But the culture around her was changing, and newer names began occupying the spotlight, while her pioneering role slipped into the background. This is often how disappearance works in history, not through one dramatic betrayal, but through gradual replacement and selective memory. Men inspired by her methods would later be celebrated as fearless reporters, while her name drifted toward occasional mention and footnote status. Yet so much of modern investigative journalism still carries her fingerprints, whether audiences recognize the source or not. She proved that a reporter could cross boundaries, infiltrate systems, and transform witness into public accountability with devastating force. She also exposed a harsher truth about America itself. Cruelty often survives longest where respectability gives it shelter and language. Nellie Bly understood that institutions fear exposure more than accusation, because exposure leaves evidence that can no longer be denied. Her work mattered not because it was daring alone, but because it demanded that readers confront their own comfort and indifference. That is why her fading from popular memory feels more than unfortunate. It feels strangely revealing about what a nation chooses to preserve. We celebrate courage easily when it looks adventurous, but much less comfortably when it accuses us of looking away. By the time Nellie Bly died in 1922, she had lived several lives, each one colliding with the limits of her era. She had been a rebel, a journalist, a celebrity, an industrialist, and a witness to corners of American life many preferred hidden. Yet today, her name often survives only in fragments, detached from the urgency and fury that once made it impossible to ignore. That forgetting is not neutral, because forgetting turns a warning into trivia and a moral challenge into a charming anecdote. Nellie Bly did not merely report on cruelty. She entered it, endured it, and returned carrying proof for a nation in denial. She understood that truth has little power unless someone is willing to risk comfort, reputation, and safety to drag it into view. In that sense, her story is not only about journalism, but about the cost of forcing a society to face itself. She walked into hell so others would know, longer be able to pretend it was not there. And for a moment, America listened, reformed, and praised the woman brave enough to show it its own reflection. Then, as so often happens, memory softened, attention moved on, and one of its fiercest truth-tellers slipped quietly toward the margins. Nellie Bly changed the way stories could be told, and the tragedy is how easily history allowed that revolution to fade. She did not vanish because she mattered too little, but because she mattered in ways that remained too uncomfortable to remember.
And if Nellie Bly's story stayed with you, the next one may hit even harder. James Armistead Lafayette, the forgotten spy who helped win America's freedom while still denied his own.